I just want to welcome all of you to this fireside conversation chat. I'm Michelle Singletary. I'm a syndicated personal finance columnist for the Washington Post. And we are here talking about the power of women at work. And it is my pleasure to have this conversation as a guest, Asahi Pompey. And I just want to tell you a little bit about who she is, and then we're going to get into hopefully an exciting conversation about race and money and women. So can I call you Asahi?
Oh, please do.
Just be
Please
sure.
do.
That's okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. You've got such an impressive resume. But she's the global head of corporate engagement and president of the Goldman Sachs Foundation. Ms. Pompey joined Goldman Sachs in 2006, although she only looks 29, and was named managing director in 2010 and partner in 2018. Wow, that's just such a great career for you. So let me set the framework for what we're going to be talking about. So why are we here today? So according to the Asset Funders Network report, the median wealth of white single women was $15,640. Yet the median wealth for single Black women was just $200. While there are several factors affecting the wealth gap, we will look at the impact of COVID-19, social justice movement, ignorance, inheritance issues, housing, to gain awareness and discuss solutions to break the cycle of generational poverty, and also just talk about how do we create wealth for Black women. So again, the topic is breaking the cycle of poverty and building Black women's wealth. So I'm going to get right into the questions, Asahi. So can we unpack this sort of wealth issue? The 2019 survey of consumer finances looked at the disparity of wealth between Black families and white families, and found that both on the median and mean level, obviously, there is a huge gap, $188,000 to and $983,000 for white families, and Black families' median and mean wealth is less than 15% of that of white families at $24,100 and $142,500. Asahi, when you hear those numbers, what do you think about the wealth gap?
First of all, Michelle, thank you for having me. It's great to be in conversation with you. Look, those numbers are sobering, and they make me mad, and they make me motivated to do something to change those numbers, because those numbers have actually been getting worse, right? Mm-hmm. And you would think, as society evolves, things get better, but in fact, they're getting worse. The one number of all the numbers that stick in my head is 90%. So everybody who's listening, remember this percentage, 90%. There's a 90% wealth gap between a Black woman in this country and a white male. And I'll put those in the numbers because I know Michelle, she likes the numbers.
That's right.
So that means a Black woman's net worth is $7,000 and a white man's net worth is $92,000. Yeah. Think of the child living in the household where the net worth is $7,000 and that child's experience. Yeah. And the child living in the household, that little Black girl or little white girl in the household with $92,000. Those are different worlds, but all in America. Yeah. And that's happening as you drive through neighborhood after neighborhood after neighborhood. That's the reality. Right? And I think you framed it beautifully, Michelle, when you talked about that disparity. Now, what we did in a report that Goldman Sachs published called Black Womenomics, I have to give praise to my fellow partner, Kathy Matsui, who did the original report, Womenomics, but we just published this report, Black Womenomics. It talks about that 90% wealth gap. But Michelle, it goes further, right? Yeah, it says, well, what is that attributed to, right? And as we looked at it, we found that 2/3 of that wealth gap is actually related to earnings. So when you go into your boss and you're like, am I making the same amount as that guy next door? You're right to ask that question, because the earnings gap is really a large component of why there's the wealth gap. So it's things like from I can't find a job, try as I might, I can't find a job. Or I found a job, but it's a part-time job. Or I found a job, it's a full-time job, but guess what? There no time off for sick days, there's no benefits, there's no 401k, but it's full-time, right?
Yeah.
So even as we get a foot in the door, it's not all the way open.
I like that you made that point, because when we talk about the wealth gap and we give the numbers, oftentimes it's not put in context. Because when you hear the wealth gap, most people hear, well, there's something that they're doing wrong, that they're being irresponsible with their money somehow. And you talked about the income gap and even asking why is there a difference, but we don't really even ask there's a difference, right? I mean, that's one of the problems, that first of all, we don't even know what a lot of times what others making, and we don't even know to ask, wait a minute, why am I making so much less when my credentials are the same? Is that right?
I think that's exactly right. There's an information asymmetry. We all know it, right? Where, management knows the information, but you don't, right? Between where you are and where others are. And that's a contributing factor. But in addition, I think you highlight an excellent point, which is, are we even asking the question? Yeah. But I want to get away from blaming us for our situation, because that has happened generation after generation after generation. What do you need to be doing better? No, there's systemic issues at play that are beyond the individual. Yeah. That are, that woman and that man, they're working 2 jobs, right? My mom worked 2 jobs. Her ending salary was never more than $37,000 a year. And it was not for a lack of working hard. She worked hard every day.
I know, that's such a great point. I want to go back to the reasons for the wealth gap. And this persistent systemic racism that America just doesn't want to own up to. And during a town hall last year at Goldman Sachs, you shared a letter to your 11-year-old son. What were you hoping your son would gain from that letter?
You're right. It was a town hall that the firm had. It was 9 days after George Floyd was killed. And our CEO, David Solomon, pulled together the entire firm and asked 3 Black leaders at the firm to speak. I spoke, Margaret Anadou spoke, and one of my other colleagues spoke. And Michelle, I have to tell you, that morning, I wasn't sure what I was going to say. Emotions were raw. And my son had come into me over the weekend to say that he'd watched George Floyd 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And imagine with your 11-year-old saying, I just watched a killing. Right? And in that moment, I had to figure out how I was going to lead at that town hall. And sometimes you lead with data. I've got the most information, right? Yes. Sometimes you lead with your expertise, like I'm the expert in this. And sometimes you lead with vulnerability. And that was a moment where I thought my best way to lead in that moment was going to be leading with vulnerability. And I don't walk into Goldman Sachs every day and say, how can I be vulnerable? Right. But in that moment, I did. And I told them what it's like. And I think there were 3 messages I wanted to convey to that audience. One was, this is our reality. This is the lived experience of a Black person that sits next to you. Yeah. Right? That's in the office, that we chat when we have good conversations in the hallway, that you care about, that you respect, and I respect you. And so this is when I leave this building and my family are together, that's our lived experience. So that's the one thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to convey was, wealth does not protect us from discrimination, right? So, right, people think like, oh, there are different kind of Black people. There's the Black person who does the checkout counter at the grocery store. And then there's the Black person that I work with that went to Harvard and Dartmouth, but that's a different kind of Black person. And their experience must be really different. In some ways it is, but in a lot of ways, it's not.
Yeah. That's such a great point. Yeah, that's a great point. And it also brings up the point of that's the good minority. Right? I mean, I'm sure you've had people say to you, because I know they said that to me, well, Michelle, you're at the Washington Post, so clearly other Black people can overcome this thing that they claim is racism. So that's such a great point about that. It's an experience that we all share. So what was the third point that you said you wanted to be vulnerable, but that there's a shared experience, and what was the third?
I wanted to say that we collectively can be agents for change,
Yeah.
right? From sharing information to being an ally. I wanted to give them an entry point to say, I'm not just telling you something and leaving it at your doorstep. I'm saying, join me. I'm saying partner with me. I'm saying we can turn this tide together. That my 11-year old when that comes around has a different experience that's substantially different. So let's do it together. It was an invitation and a call to action.
So do you think that they heard you? Because sometimes when you put yourself in those vulnerable positions, it's good in the moment. Everyone comes up and, oh, you're so brave to talk about that. And then nothing happens. Do you think it made a difference?
I have to say I have like this duality where I am eternally optimistic, but I'm not a Pollyanna.
Right.
And so I think it did make a difference. I think the firm shifted that day. And I think people's hearts and minds were open from the leadership of the firm all the way through the organization. And I've seen it sustained in terms of now we're launching 1 million Black women. And if you told me, as you mentioned in 2006 when I joined the firm, that we were going to be doing the largest ever commitment to Black women in America at $10 billion, I would have said, Michelle, that sounds great. I hope it happens, but I don't know.
So tell me more about that commitment. What will that mean practically? And not just for what Goldman Sachs is doing, but do you think it will set an example for the other organizations that the women who are listening work for?
Oh, I hope so. That's the big prize, right? Not only that Goldman Sachs did it with 10 billion, but that other organizations said that 90% I'm going to be a change agent to narrow that gap. I want to say close it all together, but it was like let's just work on narrowing it now. And so that's the big hope, is that movement will come about where others join. But as you said briefly on the initiative, it's $10 billion, billion with a B, over 10 years to impact the lives of at least 1 million Black women by the year 2030.
Right. And practically, what will that mean? More
Right.
jobs, more income, looking at salary disparities. What will they be doing exactly?
So practically speaking, what it means is we have about 6 or so buckets where we'll be making investments. So think about it as we wanted to do a cradle to the grave model, because Michelle, you and I know it's not just one thing. Like if we fixed education, then we're good. We fixed education. If we fixed healthcare, we're dying 3 times the rate of COVID-19. Like if we fixed healthcare, that would it. No, there's no silver bullet. We've got to fix healthcare. We've got to fix education. We've got to fix housing. Black families are a third less likely to have broadband. How are the kids doing Zoom at home if there's no broadband, right? So there's a whole myriad of things. So our approach, very practically speaking, is we're going to follow the arc of a Black woman's life. And we're going to start, we have the worst maternal health outcomes in this country. Right? And as a mother of 2, my heart goes out to all those women who have experienced that loss. And so starting with healthcare centers, better hospitals in Black neighborhoods, right? So that's the kind of investment in our health from the very beginning. Then taking the arc of that Black girl's life, pre-K, is she getting the kinds of schooling, investing in schooling and development there? Then as we go on, she's trying to get some loans to go to school, some scholarships to go to school, right? Are we funding Black banks, CDFIs, and others to be able to fund Black families and Black students? And so the investments are across these sleeves of healthcare, housing, education, technology, and the like.
Yeah, can we talk a little bit about when these type of programs are created? There's always this pushback that why can't they just take advantage of what's already out there? There's like, isn't this sort of reverse discrimination that you're spending and having so much time on just this group of people? How do you counter those kind of comments?
I actually smile when I get those questions because I see it as an opportunity to provide information. And I've got lots of it.
Yeah.
So this will be, I say, pull up a chair, and we're going to talk. We're going to have a conversation. So I would say a number of things. I would say you have to look at the history and always, as you said, Michelle, put things in context, right? When you talk about redlining and practices that, everybody agrees, not everybody, but most reasonable people understand that there were discriminatory practices in place that prevented Black individuals from getting loans to improve their house, to get insurance on their house. Most wealth in this country is from inheritance, right? A lot of people, how do they buy their first home? Grandma left them some money. Well, a Black woman is less likely to get that. So when you look at the history of the rocks that have been put down to keep her down, and now you're saying, you know what we're going to do? We're going to provide some opportunity because we're cognizant of those structures that have been in place that have disproportionately and adversely impacted her. And when we, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt. Go ahead.
No, and I hope when you frame it that way, that a reasonable person might be able to come around to saying, oh, there was a lot of burden there, and we need to, as a society, do things to really correct that.
And what I was going to say is what I loved about your explanation is that is so important that we know the history as well, so that when we get this pushback, we don't say, well, there's just redlining and end it there, because there were things put in place systemically, like FHA, for example. You couldn't get a loan back by the FHA if you sold it to a Black family. And then sort of goes into this whole, conversation about the wealth gap, right? I wanted to talk a little bit about and roll back to home ownership, because that's such a key. When we look at that gap, isn't most of Americans' wealth in their home, the equity in their home, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we know that about 73% of American white families own homes, and it's sort of disturbing that, especially now with COVID, that Black homeownership has actually been rolled back. Like the percentage is almost the same as when housing discrimination at about 45% was legal. So can you talk about a little bit about the housing gap and why that makes a difference in building wealth for Black families and Black women in particular?
Yeah. I mean, you rightly point out, 73% of white house individuals own their home. It's roughly 43% for Black individuals. And that hasn't changed, right, over the last several years. And again, always people kind of expect things get better. And I think they're always surprised to say during MLK's time and now that hasn't really changed. Right. So I would say the next layer down is let's look at the homes that Black women live in. So 1/3 of the homes that Black women live in are estimated to be unsafe. And that means not appropriate heating, not appropriate plumbing, alarms that aren't properly installed or in the house at all. And then we're not even talking about, 1% problems like broadband, right? Which shouldn't be a 1% problem. And so when you look at we are less likely to own homes. The homes we are in are 1/3 of them are estimated to be unsafe. Then you add on top of that, we're the most rent burdened. And what I mean by that, and I like to get specific, is more than 30% of our income is going to paying just to keep a roof over our head. Right? And so when that's carved off, like how much more do you have for all the other things that you have to do in life? And so it's that trifecta of things that we're seeing as it relates to housing. So better housing, greater home ownership, that's going to be one of the ways in which we're able to start creating intergenerational wealth in Black communities.
Isn't the issue also just the way our properties are valued as well? I mean, the Brookings Institute, institution rather, looked at this, and it said that Black neighborhoods are undervalued by $48,000, excuse me, per home on average, amounting to $156 billion with a B, like you point out, and accumulative losses. So even when we have a good, decent house, I'm thinking about my house, and I'm in this wonderful neighborhood. I've got a single family home. I've got about 1 acre of land. There's a pond with ducks. But if you picked up my home and moved it, 20 miles east or west, it would be worth, considerably more. And the only difference is the occupants of my neighborhood are Black. How do you combat that? You're doing all the right things, right? You've bought a home, you bought it in a nice neighborhood, and still our homes are appraised less, which contributes again to the wealth gap, right?
So beautifully said, Michelle. And I'm coming to your home. I'm just letting you know. I'm coming to your home. But you're absolutely right, right? We bought the house and still we're not getting the value out of that house. And let's say you wanted to sell it or you wanted to pass it on to a child or a family member. It's compounded that lower value again, those rocks on top over time. And so you're absolutely right to point that out. I have to tell you, over the summer, I refinanced my own mortgage on my house. And, I was concerned, the person that was coming in to appraise, I wasn't sure he was actually going to come in person because of COVID to do the appraisal. But they said, oh, we're going to come in person to do the appraisal. I said, okay, great, wear a mask, do the whole thing. Came in, and the thought went through my head, he's seeing a Black woman's house.
Yeah.
And how is that going to impact how he's going to appraise this house on the Upper West Side of Manhattan? Right?
Yeah.
And would it be any different? And so it's not only in the neighborhood, as you point out, but who lives in that house,
Right.
and how that lens in terms of the value of that property is what it's going to be. Here in terms of solutions, because I like to point out problems, but I like to focus on solutions, right?
Yeah, me too.
So,
That's right.
so in terms of solutions, look, I think that sunlight is disinfectant. And to be able to do exactly the scenario where you just described, where you say, I'm going to take Michelle's house and I'm going to find another house in a white neighborhood that's comparable, that's got the same, and let's look at this value. Mm-hmm. What do we think is going on there besides discriminations, besides bias? Like what else? And if there's another factor, then I want to hear it. Right? I want to hear it. I'm open to dialogue. I'm open to learning. I'm open to discussion. But I think part of the beauty of Black Womenomics, this report we just published, is really to get the information out there and to really engender a conversation that then leads to solutions.
Yeah. But it's so interesting when you talk about even about the appraisal, there have been studies that show that if a Black family, has all their pictures up and all their, maybe African artwork, and they come through and they get lower offers, then they remove any sign that there's a Black family there, the price goes up. Yeah. And that's so disheartening to people. How it is so interesting when we this is my husband and I's second home we built, and in our first home, a white appraiser came in. And he just sort of made comments that made me think, you don't really think that we keep our property. And he kept saying, oh, this house is how old? Man, really? Like as if this, why would you be of course.
Yep.
We keep our house nice,
Of
and there
course.
were little, kind of microaggressions like that. And in the moment you feel, what can I do? This guy, you've got to be nice to them. You can't say, those things you're saying are a little racist there, dude. Mm-hmm. You said, you want to have actionable solutions. What do you do in those kind of situations?
Sometimes I have to admit, Michelle, I'm bold. I will name things in those moments, mm-hmm. right? And, in that moment, and I'm going back to my own appraisal over the summer, to be able to say, look, I'm a Black woman. It's clear that, that's who I am. And, I know historically sometimes appraisals have differed depending on the race or gender of the individual. I would hope that wouldn't be the case with your bank, but, I'd be remiss if I didn't, if I didn't point that out. And I'm sure you understand.
I love that. I'm gonna bring you along next time we get ready to sell our house.
With a bit of grace, but with a bit of grace and dignity, but also clarity.
Right. So that's a great segue into, let's talk more about actionable things. So we know that there's a system in place. We know that there's still legacy of redlining. So as individuals, what can we do? Let's just stick with home ownership. What can we do to help ourselves narrow that wealth gap as it relates to home ownership?
So I think it has to start with earnings, right? Because we're not going to get to the point to be able to purchase the home unless we earning the money to be able to finance the home. So I think it goes back to one, jobs. Two, when we're in those jobs, that we're asking tough questions. And I wouldn't even say tough questions, right? We're asking questions about our worth and our value, right? To be able to say, these are my credentials. This is how long I work here. You know, as I think about how I'm compensated, I want to make sure that I'm being compensated appropriately for the value that I bring to your company. And in a way that's, you know, and everyone will say, yes, of course we benchmark, but that conversation will be remembered. Right? And so I think have those conversations to begin with around compensation. If you're not happy or you think it should be different, have another conversation about it as well. And if ultimately you feel like you're not being paid what you should, then I would say try to find another opportunity in a place that's going to value you. But we've got to make sure that we're securing that if the money is not coming in, we're not going to be able to buy that house,
That's
right?
a good point. Yeah.
And so I think that that's, in terms of what the individual can do, I think that that's key, and it starts there. Then as we go further along, there's not enough financial literacy in our communities, Michelle, right? You know, where people, like I was talking to my brother, and he works for Con Edison. He is awesome. I'm like, you've got to make sure you're using that 401k, right?
Exactly.
You've got to make sure.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to be matching, contributing enough to get that full match, right? And so I'm having that on, you know, hand-to-hand combat with my younger brother around his plan. But it's across the board that sort of take advantage of courses, anything that's offered on knowing your money. Knowing your money and where you may be leaving money on the table and where there may be additional opportunities for you to get that, because it's compounded over time, right? And so, and the lessening is compounded too. So you make a teeny bit more and then you compound that, all of a sudden you're in a different bracket. And so I think financial literacy, and we're working on coming out with something related to that. Hopefully we'll be able to, you know, do something on that very soon. But I think that that's another one too. And then we can get to the home ownership. But we've got to make sure that we're shoring up these areas in addition.
If we can just slide back a little bit about the salary negotiations, that's always been a hard thing for women in general, especially women of color. It's very, you know, people don't like to talk about money. I know in my own career, I undervalued myself, but was able to sort of kind of ask for little increases that I was, of course, immensely proud of, but they were still little. But what I found was that I had a couple of different types of mentors on my job. So I had people who could help me with my career in the sense of writing and becoming, you know, a columnist at the Post and giving me advice about that. And then I found, actually it was a man. And I went up to him and I said, you know, I think I'm not being paid enough. And I'm just really uncomfortable asking for more money. It's just, I don't like that conversation. And he just set me aside and he says, you should ask for exactly what you want. I said, what? I can't do that. He said, you most certainly can. He said, do you think those white boys go in there all timid? He said, they ask for all kinds of stuff. And he actually emboldened me to ask for more. And in fact, it did. I got a huge raise. You know, they staggered it over time, of course. But what do you recommend? Or if you're a bold person, you can't be a partner at Goldman Sachs without having some sort of bold personality. You can't become a columnist for the Washington Post, but everybody's not like us, right? We're not kind of in people's space and willing to take that step. What advice do you have, practically speaking, for women who know for sure that they are being underpaid, especially as Black women, to have that conversation and not kind of come off as the angry Black woman, or, you know, because that's kind of the narrative when it comes to us.
Yeah, that's how they try to steal our voice, by, you know, keep us quiet by worrying about that. So I would say a couple of things, very practically speaking. And I don't take credit for this. I learned it in a course several years ago that was about how to negotiate. And one of the things that they said in that course is they said, part of what holds us back is we're thinking we're doing it for ourselves.
Right.
But a mindset, a lot of negotiation is really about where's your mindset? And so if you start off with the mindset of, Michelle, you're not doing this for you, but you are a fiduciary, right? All of a sudden, if you want to get, you know, a Black woman's juices going, you're going to tell her that she is a fiduciary for others, and you're doing it for your mother who didn't get, you're doing it for your children to make sure that they can go to a particular school or have a certain kind of summer experience or opportunity, right? And so all of a sudden, the data found that when people thought about their negotiation as being a fiduciary and that they are doing it on behalf of someone else, it emboldened them to be able to actually go in and ask for it. So if that works for you, I would put it out there as a practical tip that the data says worked. And I wanted to.
I like that. So go in there and think about Big Mama, think about Cousin Peaches,
Yes.
think about your network of family members that you can help in terms of legacy. And that actually goes to sort of the next question I want to talk about is sort of education. So, a growing body of research shows that African American students are more likely than whites to have student loan debt. And that financial burden forces a lot of them to drop out or have decades of debt. Now, I've got a whole opinion about student loan debt. I believe that we're taking on too much, even as African Americans, because we heard the message. You've got to have a college education for many jobs in America. But unfortunately, I think we heard the message at any cost. And I think there are other avenues for people to go to college than just the 4-year live on campus, $50,000 a year at a brand name school. I went to a state school. The guy sitting across from me at the Washington Post went to Harvard, and we got to the Post at about the same time. And I'm actually still at the Post, a columnist, having gone to Baltimore City Public Schools, not private, and a state school. And so I think that we've got to be very careful about that message that we're giving to especially to Black parents, Black women, that you got to do whatever it takes to send that kid, even if it means taking on decades of debt for you and that child. I mean, where do you stand on that? And how do we still get that education without, and I like your scenario of all those rocks, because really that is still a rock in terms of affordability.
Yeah, Michelle, you so get it, because I love what you just described, because I've seen it play out, right? Really, really good friend. At all cost, decided to, go to school, took out a lot of debt to be able to do that, and wasn't able to pay back the debt, defaulted on the debt. Then when she was applying for a job, she made it all the way through. And through the background process, you know where I'm going.
I know where you're going. I know where you're going.
She wasn't able to get the job because she defaulted on the debt. And I was like, oh my, this is the cycle played out, right? Cycle played out. And so she wasn't able to get the job that would be able to give her no. Anyway, you get my point.
I get it.
And so really, really true what you highlight. So I would say, a couple of things. I remember when I left law school, I had, and I'm a product of New York City public schools, I had $73,000 worth of debt. Mm-hmm. And that felt like the world to me. It was more money than either of my parents' annual salary combined, was that $73,000 worth of debt. And I didn't know how I was going to pay it off, except I was like, gotta go where I can make the most money possible. Went to a Wall Street law firm. I wanted the experience as well, but definitely being able to pay down those loans was, my way to do that. And so I would say a couple of things. One is I would look at schools where you can think about, are you able to, what certain schools provide an even greater return on investment. Right. And there are a lot of data out there around, if you go to this particular school, this is where their graduates end up, this is what's going on. Two, we've got to help Black students, right? They need more scholarship help, right? Unequivocally. Right? I remember when I was going to school, I graduated in 3 years, and I would get people who were like, wow, Asahi, that's really great that you graduated in 3 years. The reason I graduated in 3 years is my scholarship was running out. Less money, less money, less money, less money, right? Yep. It was less money. And my scholarship was running out. I couldn't afford that 4th year. And so I let people for years be impressed by she graduated, in 3 years. And finally, at some point, I'm like, no, I need to tell them. That's right. I owe it to all the students who are like me to tell them, no, I did this. Otherwise, I wouldn't be working across from you, right? I wouldn't be your boss today if I didn't do this.
Yeah, I love that story. I love that honesty. And same situation. I wouldn't have probably been able to go to college had it not been for a scholarship. I got an academic scholarship for journalism. But interesting enough, I'm so grateful that I won that scholarship because my grandmother wouldn't fill out the financial aid forms because she was afraid, as in her words, that the white man was going to take her house. And
Yeah.
I cried for weeks because I would have, my grandmother raised me, so we had not a lot of money, and I would have qualified for everything on the table, and she would not. She was steadfast, and I was so upset and angry at her because she was saying, "Oh, the white man's gonna take my stuff." And I said, "Well, that happened way back when," and I didn't realize until I did a series for the Washington Post on race and money that she was not being unreasonable. From her experience, that exactly happened. White people took black homes. We know that happened. And so she taught me a really good lesson about actually just knowing my history, but also just pressing forward. So I, found a scholarship. And now I tell people, listen, if you can't afford the 4-year, 2 years community college, then transfer it to the 4-year university. I wonder what you think about, because you work at such a prestigious firm. I work at like the Washington Post, but there's this pressure for us in particular to do things in such a big way, like brand name schools, Ivy League schools, very expensive things, private school, to make things even. But in that process, we do burden ourselves with a lot of debt that can then come back to bite us with our wealth gap. So how do you sort of, you don't want to discourage people. And I don't say don't apply to those schools, but when it came to my children, we said, if we don't have the money to, because we make just enough not to get any money, right? That you can't go. We have University of Maryland money saved for you. We sent all our kids to college with no debt. So that's all we have, and that's where you're going to go. And it worked out fine. They're brilliant. They won scholarships. So how do we encourage people to reach up, but not so much so that they impact their wealth building ability?
I think it's a matter of saying, look, there are multiple paths, right, to get there. So this person A's path is going to be, she's going to go to Harvard undergrad, and she's going to go to Yale Law, and she's going to, that's her path. And then it's going to be this other person's path, and their path may be going to SUNY Albany or SUNY, Baltimore, or another school. Another person's path may be a historically black college or university, right? And when you look at the legacy of, Vice President Harris, Nikki Giovanni, just legends that have gone to historically black colleges and universities. 1/3 of bachelor's degrees that black people hold are from an HBCU. Maybe an HBCU is this woman's path, right? And so to legitimize all of these paths.
Yeah.
And say, all of these paths can get you where you need to be. And everybody, just because you took this route versus that route, you're no less than, right?
I love that. That's right.
It's about what doors you're going to open and what we as institutions can help you open, and pathways that we can create, right? Because the individual can only do so much. Corporations have got a role to play. Family members have got a role to play. Yes, the individual as well. The government has a role to play, right? We all have to be working along that and legitimize all those paths, because no sister's path, I'm not gonna put her down for whatever path she took.
I love that. I love that. And going back to your term fiduciary, isn't that also part of building wealth, to be true to yourself financially, that you shouldn't stretch to achieve, live within your means, and that that will help create, wealth for your family. Isn't, don't you think?
Definitely true. Definitely true. And so credit card debt is sort of the, is sort of, yeah, I know. I do the eye roll too with that one. But that's sort of, ground zero, right, in terms of living within your means. Though we've seen so many examples where people are putting medical bills on credit cards, right? And so even there we have to think about, the burdens that we have, because we don't have other routes. And that becomes the way in which we're able to, finance someone's surgery or whatever they, whatever they may need to. So there's so many layers, Michelle, so many layers.
I know. So we've just got a couple more minutes, and I wish this conversation could go on forever because we could talk about so many more things. But if you had to say sort of your top 3 takeaways for those women who are listening, things that they can do while we're working. I mean, you at Goldman Sachs are working on a larger level to make even the playing field. Even as I write about, you know, the importance of financial literacy, that's sort of a bigger reach. But as an individual, what can those who are listening to us today do for themselves to help narrow that bridge gap, the wealth gap that exists for Black women?
Yeah, so I would say three things in particular. One is I would say do a baseline assessment, right? Where am I? What's my credit card debt? Where do I have some student loans still out there? Look at my salary over the last several years, right? I keep a spreadsheet. You know, I'm getting pragmatic. I keep a
Right.
spreadsheet. This is when I started at Goldman Sachs in 2006. I can tell you exactly where I was, then 2007 and where I was, right? So spend a weekend or however long it takes you, but get your house in order in terms of, and sometimes it's hard to look at, right? You're like, do I want to go, like, look at all this, dig up all that stuff? Feels like work, but this is good work. There's good trouble. This is good work. Right? So do the good work of just getting a baseline of what are all the things that I have and to really do a full-based assessment. One. Two, figure out whether you need to have that conversation with the boss or whomever else around the amount that you're making. Three, set goals for yourself of where you want to be and then be disciplined about holding yourself accountable. And the last thing I'd say is, I'm sure we have our sisterhoods, but our sisterhoods may not be around finances. Maybe it's about other things. But I have a sisterhood with certain women around finances, and we talk very freely about it, where I'm like, you know, I'm thinking about Max and Sebastian's college education. You know, this is what I did for the 529 this year. You know, you can contribute up to 18,000 or whatever the amount is. And we talk I don't have anything to hide, right?
Yeah,
we're all in this trying to provide for our families, right? Now that strategy may not work for everyone, but maybe to the extent that you feel comfortable, having that sisterhood and brotherhood or whomever it is, but talking to other individuals around how they're thinking about it, you learn. You learn things along the way that are helpful and just sort of sharpening the sword.
I love that. Those are so great. Thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation. I know that there's so much more we could have talked about, but I think that we've given them a real clear path on how to help narrow that wealth gap. Be bold in asking for your money, watch your money, and find some money mentors or people who can help you keep accountable with your finances. Thank you so much, Asahi Pompey. I'm so glad that we had this opportunity to talk. And thank you guys for listening. And we hope that you have just a wonderful conference going forward.
Thank you so much, Michelle. This was fantastic. Thank you.